Buon pomeriggio.
Good evening to you all. Let me address my welcome. I'm particularly happy to be host here in this event at the Chamber of Deputies, Women in Politics, and I would like to thank the UK Embassy. I want to thank Jim Morris, the UK Ambassador, and our colleagues, our friends, which will take the floor during the debate. And before starting the debate, I'm really honored to give the floor to the President of the Senate, Maria Elisabetta Alberti Casellati, for a few words. Thank you to you all for being here. Good evening to you all, authorities, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank for the invitation the Vice President, Honorable Carfagna, which is in the forefront on equal opportunities, as a promoter of measures that have provided a wide contribution also on the aspect of security of women and safety of women in general. I would like to thank also the UK Ambassador in Italy, Jill Morris, who through these meetings with Women in of female commitment is providing an invaluable and very important contribution. I would like to welcome also Amber Rudd, Secretary of State for Work and Pension of United Kingdom, and Ian Lang, Deputy Speaker of the House of Commons of United Kingdom. I welcome Emma Bonino, always in the forefront in civil rights battles and female emancipation, and Valeria Mancinelli, first woman to have been elected mayor in Ancona. I'm really pleased to have today and provide my contribution to this meeting, because this enables me to make some consideration on the way that women have made in the last dozen of years. I'm thinking about, of course, to the great ideal push forward that we all lived with in 1979 of Margaret Thatcher, the first Minister of United Kingdom. We have spoken so much about Thatcher, the choices she has made in the matter of economics, and not only on the results achieved, and also her political awareness and what she has left in terms of courage, as determination, her pragmatism have inevitably put in the second line another aspect which was revolutionary of her presidency, which was the fact that she of women chairing institution. Before Thatcher, we had never seen a woman chairing a government or a state of a European country. The experience, the closest experience we may see, that the one which is living in Golda Meir, the first minister in Israel since 1969 to 1974. She has been called to this responsibility just after half a century of political commitment. In 1979, with the first Thatcher government, changes forever the reality of Europe. Since then, 30 have been the women who have chaired government in Europe, and there is a growing mark which seems to grant the conclusion of any border or any prejudice, any bias. From this point of view, the most significant aspect in Mrs. Thatcher leading the UK government is that no one had ever been able to link to casualty or even of equal opportunities. Her leadership was so strong, so authoritative, that it was to be given for granted that just it was a woman who was so qualified, so skilled, so determined, so as to leave such an incredible heritage. So beyond any political judgment, we must say that we are fully grateful to what she has done, and all the citizens who want to be well administered beyond the gender in respect of Our Lady. Just after her election, the experience multiplied from Portugal to Northern Europe countries, from countries of Russian, former USSR, and Theresa May and Angela Merkel as well. Italy, unfortunately, is a step behind, because even if we have had a lot of conquests, but we are considering the future in an optimistic way. Here in the chamber, we have had one of the most important examples that we have seen compared to the women in institutional roles, and considering, for instance, to Nilde Iotti, who chaired for 13 years the Chamber of Deputies, just elected in June 1979, 1 month after Margaret Thatcher. She made some consideration, very important consideration on this aspect. She said in her opening speech, I lived in this moment in an emblematic way, because I feel a meaning and a deep commitment that goes beyond my person, and also invest in a lot of women, which after a lot of fights have paved the way toward their emancipation. She was perfectly right. The path for a total emancipation of women in our country has been certainly long, and it has not been easy at all, not only in politics, but also in business and in profession as well. So a step ahead have required patience and duration. First law in the matter of safeguard of working mother dates back to 1950, whereas women have had the possibility of entering into the judiciary just in 1963. To approve a measure which could have impact in gender equality, we had to wait a long time. I'm considering particularly the amendment of Article 51 of the Constitution, which was approved in 2003, to accept the entry of women in a reform which enabled women to get into terms of office, which was very important to cover the differences in equal opportunities. And this is very important because today female leadership in the institution, in business, and more in general in the work business is becoming a solid reality and is even more widespread. My election as President of the Senate, the first woman in the history of our High Chamber, has been a signal of paramount importance, because this is sided with general attitude which sees that the women will stand from 4 of the 5th legislature to the 110. Most recent statistics says that the percentage of women that have achieved a degree in the latest year keeps on being higher than the one of men. So this is a fundamental requirement to continue this extraordinary, wonderful, and very difficult path. In this perspective, the politics of empowerment of women become an instrument which is of paramount importance, not only in an individual way, but also for society, in order to infuse among women security and awareness of their own possibilities. Politics which have to be carried out through the valorization of female leadership, of women who have been able to gain their merits and their skills. So a commitment which has been very important also at international level, which must highlight also those who were able to cover roles of responsibilities, play their commitment in a professional and an effective way. Let me to wish you a fruitful working session to all women elected to European Parliament that represent the 43% of the Assembly, to Ursula von der Leyen and Christine Lagarde, who have been disappointed respectively to the chair of European Commission and of European Central Bank. I would like also to conclude my speech by reminding also Margaret Thatcher, who must have been a sort of a stimulus for all of us. I don't know anyone, nobody who has been able to reach a top position without working hard. This is the only recipe I know, and this is so. I thank you for your attention.
Ringraziamo. I would like to thank the President of the Senate again, Ms. Elisabetta Casellati, for being here with us today and for her speech, which has been particularly inspirational and which has provided food for thought for our debate. I would like to welcome you all again. I would like to thank you for accepting our invitation to join us today, and I would like to thank our speakers who will give their presentations after me. It is my honor to host these initiatives here at the Chamber of Deputies, a valuable initiative allowing us to exchange views and experiences on the participation and presence of women in politics and on the increased presence of women within institutions. I would like to express my gratitude for all those women who have fought when some of us started entering politics. Equality was reached by law thanks to courageous women who fought important battles for this, both within and outside their respective parliaments. I would like to mention on this occasion, at the presence of our UK friends and colleagues, a pioneer of the right to vote for women, Emily Pankhurst, who fought a battle to obtain the right to vote, and she won in 1918, and we are particularly grateful to her because by that fight she marked what was unthinkable for women at that time. Sadly, we should say that even if formal equality has been achieved, substantial equality has not been achieved. For example, the labour market. But the great steps ahead that has been made, especially in the last decades, show that we will be strong enough to involve even more women, even more courageous and inspiring women will be able to give their contributions. But we must be aware that the battle to obtain full equality is still underway, and we need to be tough and determined. And we should also supervise the scenario, because what we got is quite recent, and they are at risk of, they are vulnerable, they shouldn't be taken for granted. So we should fight for them to be consolidated and to be enshrined in the culture, in the language, in public opinion. Nowadays, I should say, or aware of appearing a sort of trade unionist for women, but I try to be objective, and I must say that we need even much more effort of women, because there is a need for this. We are living a very difficult time. We are facing a crisis, both economic and financial crisis, and this linked to immigration, to the immigration issues. So we are living a very difficult time, obscure time, let me say. Gaps are even deeper. Intolerance and hate and violence are on the increase. Many children, many women are at risk of poverty. They are killed sometimes, they are abused. So in this context, I think the female method could really make a difference. The caring attitude, a dialogue the reasoning, the recognition of adversaries, the respect of adversaries, mediation searched by women, but not on the decrease. Women are very pragmatic, we know that, and they want to achieve concrete results. They measure the impact of economic choices on the life of people, and they are in the forefront. And sometimes men don't want to run the risk of failing. And the sentence by Christine Lagarde is particularly important when she said what she said in 2008 after the Lehman Brothers crisis. She said, if there had been the Lehman sisters, maybe the world would be different today. And we are no doubts about it. It is very easy to share such view. And this awareness seems to be even more mature, even in Europe. Christine Lagarde, precisely, and Ursula von der Leyen are candidates for top positions, the Central Bank and the European Commission. And this has been the case for their merits. There was no need to appeal to equality, to resort to quotas, because a very strong need was felt, we were talking about this with Emma Bonino. It's quite bizarre that Ursula von der Leyen asked to assert this need we were talking about, equality. She asked any government, all the governments, to indicate the name of both a man and a woman to obtain a gender-based European Commission, a gender-balanced European Commission. So we will see what will happen next days. In the meantime, a very pragmatic female generation is gaining to top positions everywhere, and also they've also forced their parties to very traumatic turning point, as is the case in Finland, in Denmark, in Spain, for example. Let's talk about the very young leader of Ciudadanos, and also in France, Marine Le Pen, Slovakia, Romania, Serbia, and Germany, where we do not have only Angela Merkel, but we also have a very young liberal leader who upset the last election results in Bavaria. So this wave of determined women shows what Ms. Casellati was saying before, that the example of one of a few people is very important, because it is an encouragement for others to step ahead and to make a change, a cultural shift. The glass ceiling we press, it is a very important sentence pronounced by Ms. Clinton. She said that the glass ceiling we are breaking are of paramount importance for every woman who is watching us. For any glass ceiling we are breaking, there is a breakthrough for other women all over the world. Those women who challenge the laws written by men. It's a very important lesson for all of us, and that's why I've never believed in pink quotas. No woman loves actually pink quotas and appreciates the idea that she is able to hold a top position only because she's part of an underrepresented group, because this is provided for by law. But on some occasions I had to agree that there was a need to amend the terrible mechanisms of male defense. I'm thinking about the law introducing the pink quotas in Italy in the board of directors, and the double preferences for administrative elections. It's not an imposing mechanism such as the pink quotas, but it's a mechanism encouraging electors to give his preferences to alternative gender candidates. this mechanism should be regarded as an emergency to balance discrepancies, should be not tolerated by a civil country. But they are actually an emergency because the path towards equality has been consolidated quite recently. Here in Italy, the right to vote for women was very late as compared to the UK. I read some pages on the debate before the female suffrage. Many reiterated some bias according to which women were not skilled enough to be judgmental, to judge, because balance is needed, and women lack this balance due to a physiological nature. During the drafting of our constitution, there are some women who fought to obtain some caring systems for children born outside marriage. Yes, she said they were hoping they couldn't be elected, and sometimes they told us that we would spend our whole money for dresses or hair dryers. These are bias. That maybe can be changed by the passing of time, but they are still there as bias, as barriers on the path towards equality. Despite this, we have an increasing presence of women in the institutions, in Parliament. We reached 35% in 2018, many young women, aged very young, both in the Senate and in the Chamber of Deputies. In 2003, equal opportunities were introduced, and we had a double preferences, gender-based in 2017 by law 165. So female promotion has become an obligation, and parties should introduce preferences in single-member constituencies and pluri-member constituencies. These battles have been fought, resisting some bias, but we gained such success. Still, few women hold top positions. Only 3 times that we had women sitting as president of the chambers. We have here Elisabetta Alberti Casellati, who is the first female president of the Senate, and I'm very proud to say this because President Casellati and me are members of the same party, which is a party that has encouraged women, also young women, as was the case for me. I was privileged enough to be a minister for equal opportunities, aged only 32. Apart from the data on local authorities, where we have actually not very successful results, but I think that we should also focus our attention on something else. So the language, the tenor of our national politics, a tenor which is particularly dominated by men. Sometimes it is aggressive. A type of communication very simplified. Sometimes we hear facts matter and not words, but I learned in my experience, my political experience as a woman committed to politics, that words are not neutral or harmless, especially during the dictatorship of social media, digital platforms that are sometimes the only source of information for young generations. So we are under the obligation to wonder what type of example we are given through the language and the words used. We are particularly concerned that, unlike what happened in the past, women are not protagonists in the government. Let's consider the agenda of priorities, the lack of hearing of security for women, and the lack of evaluation, of valorization of women's role, the women employment, and the services they need to be successful in their career despite their families. If we want to gain political results that are proportionate to our advancement, to our talent in our society, that should be enough to change the world. We should frankly say that the difference we can make is not significant or virtuous per se, but it must be at the service of the aspirations of anyone. The challenge we are facing is big in terms of inclusion, protection, and as to the contents of and new ideas and credibility of politics, which has the duty to make proposals for our progress, for our growth. And we should think even more in terms of environmental sustainability, as is the case as younger generations are asking us to do. We should avoid disequalities, and we should avoid the increase of hate, intolerance. People ask to be represented in their dignity rather than in their hate, in their anger. We should construe a dialogue with citizens, because the crisis has prejudiced, has jeopardized the trust in the institutions, and we should be long-sighted. We should find alliances to build a new political class, a strong political class, so as to able to interpret and to translate in practical proposals the needs of citizens, and to show that the people who are engaging publicly should be considered as an opportunity to be useful, to serve the purpose of others, of the public, and both a responsibility and an opportunity, which is also a limitation for our private life, our private interests. So I think that any political woman, and all of us who are here today, we are perfectly aware that this is what we should talk about, and this is what we should focus on for our political commitments. We are fully aware that a community must be built again rather than destroyed, and that our country shouldn't be stressed, but given new trust. We will listen to your contributions, and I'm sure that any of us will take a precious message away for their own commitments and for their own ambition. Thank you very much.
Ringraziamo il
Thank the President of the Senate and the Vice President of the Chamber for having introduced this important moment of debate. And now the floor to the UK Ambassador to Italy, Jill Morris, for promoter of a campaign Women In, which is addressed to valuing female excellences in this sector where the gender equality is more strongly felt. Thank you to you all. I'm really pleased to see you all gathered in such a prestigious venue in the heart of Italian politics. I would like to thank, first of all, the President Casellati, whose presence here is a real honor, because this provides a very important distinction to this initiative. I would like to thank as well the President of Vice President of the Chamber, Mara Carfagna, who shows once more her sensitivity, the importance she attaches to promotion of the role of women, and her cooperation in and her support has been really valuable in carrying on this activity. I would like also to thank us for hosting Women in Politics, which is one of the events of paramount importance which has been gathered in this wonderful room in Montecitorio. Since I was appointed as a first woman as a UK ambassador to Italy, I've launched a series of meetings, Women in, with a purpose of grouping together Italian and English women, British women who have excelled in traditionally male gender fields such as defense, security, technology, finance, and NATO. Women in Politics is the most important event of the series, and our purpose is that of celebrating the excellence through some leading female women of Italian and British world gather here to discuss how to counter discrimination in gender and how to facilitate the access of women to politics. And I would like to thank the minister, the British Minister for Work and Pension, Humber Rudd, and Deputy Speaker Eleanor Lang for having accepted my invitation to take part in this initiative. I'm honored of the presence of Senator Emma Bonino, who is a veteran of political battles in civil matters, and I would like to welcome also as well Valeria Mancinelli, the mayor of Ancona, which has been recently awarded with the War Mayor Prize, the best mayor in the world. We are in the parliament, a high institution of a democratic state, where the representatives would have been freely elected by citizens carry out their legislative function. But how much does this representation reflect our own countries? In the United Kingdom, we have just celebrated a century of a vote to women. It was 1918 when, after dozens of years of fights, more than 8 women obtained the right to vote. Since then, a lot of progress has been made. The latest British election have given a Chamber of Commons, a House of Commons with the highest number of members of Parliament, 209 female parliamentarians, and some women we have mentioned already, Theresa May and Thatcher, have chaired our countries. And it's a woman, the Queen, who embodies the unity of our country. So strengthening the female leadership provides an opportunity of growth in any field of activity, starting from politics. Equal opportunity as well as full participation of women are fundamental to build up a stronger society, richer society, and especially inclusive in Europe, but not only. We are happy and may be proud of the progress that have been made, but we are not fully satisfied. Women are more than half of the population, but are less than 1/3 of parliamentarians. So there is not a single view on the causes which are at the basis of this. The little number of women who start thinking and considering a life in public office. So we might consider to create the conditions so that also women have a possibility of choosing freely and in an aware way to have their say in politics. As my Prime Minister said during the speech in which announced her resignation, I'll soon leave my term of office. I was honored to cover this term. I've been the second woman First Minister, the Prime Minister, but certainly not the last one. Thank you.
Ringraziamo.
I would like to thank Jill Morris, and I would like to welcome and Miss Elisabetta Casellati unfortunately has to leave us due to prior commitments. And now the floor to an authoritative representative from the UK government, Amber Rudd, Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. The House of Commons, she joined the House of Commons in 2010. 2010, she joined the post for climate change. In 2016, she was appointed as the Secretary of State at the Home Office, and in 2018, Secretary of State for Work and Pensions.
Buongiorno a tutti, grazie per avermi invitato a parlare qui alla Camera dei Deputati.
Thank you for inviting me to be here, and it has been my pleasure to visit this marvelous place.
Very much for this warm welcome, and it's already been fascinating to hear the remarks from other colleagues. I was particularly interested to hear from Presidente Casellati about Margaret Thatcher, and it's such an important reminder to many of us how extraordinary it was that she made it to be Prime Minister at a time when it was so unusual for any woman to make it to become a deputati or a member of parliament at all across Europe. And there are many extraordinary pictures of her with her cabinet where she is literally the only woman there. And we all look for examples in our lives for people who may have inspired us. And I can say with total candor that Margaret Thatcher inspired me when I was much younger. And when I saw her as Prime Minister, I realized as a young woman that this was a role that a woman could take. And it's just so important for us all as leading women in politics to remember that just for younger women thinking about their careers or their political futures, seeing other women in senior roles opens doors for them in terms of what might be possibilities. So we all know that there has been tremendous progress in terms of encouraging women into senior roles, into becoming members of parliament, but there are also daily reminders of how far we still have to go. In the UK, we have 32% of MPs are female, so that's 210 out of 650, which is up from 22% in 2010. I gather it's slightly less than in the Italian Chamber of Deputies, where you have 36% of members. And the most recent success story in Europe is in Spain, where following April's election, 46.8% of parliamentarians are women, which is more than ever before, although all their party leaders remain men. The European average is 31%, and the global average remains below 24%. And extraordinarily, I think that in the United States, only 23.5% of elected representatives are women. So we know that although tremendous progress has been made, there's still a constant battle, not only to get women elected, but to make sure that they get into the more senior roles. And I have some slides. Here's my first picture, which is a particular favourite to me, which is the G20 partners. And you can see from the G20 partners that we are very proud of our Prime Minister's husband, who you can see giving a little wave in the corner there. And some of you who follow politics closely may be aware that we will be having a new Prime Minister next week, and it's a competition between two men, so we know for sure that we will no longer have a female Prime Minister by the end of next week. And looking at the G20 partners, it's just a reminder that however well we do at getting members of parliament or deputati involved in parliament, getting women into the really senior roles has still been a struggle. Although, as has been pointed out, we've had some very good successes with Christine Lagarde and with Ursula von der Leyen, so there's some progress coming, but I feel it is a constant battle. I'm pleased that the FCO does set a positive example, and we're very proud of Jill Morris, our ambassador to Italy, of course, and thank you, Jill, for arranging this, as well as being a fantastic ambassador yourself. And I know that in our Foreign Office there are some competitive targets to make sure that we get more women into heads of mission, and making sure that the roles that haven't yet been occupied by women are going to be occupied soon. Just a final look at a couple of other slides I wanted to show you. Those are the, again, the G20 leaders at the Osaka summit. Just a reminder, there's Angela Merkel doing well, holding her own in the corner. But a reminder again how much more we need to do. And here is the cabinet that I wanted to show you that I was first in. I'm wisely, like so many women occasionally do, wearing a bold colour. Of course, what you say or what you do matters most, but occasionally wearing a bold green or other colour can help. Okay. Oh, no, I've skipped on one. There we are. This is just an interesting one for those of you who are interested in UK politics. There is Theresa May, who, as we know, is stepping down, and our front bench on the left and the Labour front bench on the right, reinforcing quite how male it is, despite the fact that we're all making tremendous efforts. And I thought that I would also show you one of your own cabinet there, which has, I gather, 6 female members out of 23 attendees. So again, a lot more progress we need to make in both of our countries to make sure that women's representation is at the very top. Why does it matter? Sometimes I talk to male MPs who look at me slightly cynically and say, what's the fuss? I represent women in my constituency as much as I do men in my constituency. And I always say to them, it's because only with women involved in politics do you get women's working lives, their families and their health properly considered. And we can see that that is exactly the outcome that has happened across all of our democracies. Once you have women involved, you have issues to do with childcare, to do with working hours, to do with crime that sometimes is overlooked, considered. And when I did my research for this panel, I was so pleased to see that Emma Bonino, who had done so much herself about women's health care, I understand, in terms of abortion rights in 1979, and we had a vote in the UK ourselves just last week about giving abortion rights and same-sex marriage rights to Northern Ireland, which is a devolved administration but has not been able to form its own administration due to our own internal politics. And so it was quite a big step to move towards taking ownership of that from Westminster. And it was so interesting to see that it was women MPs who voted disproportionately more to give women those additional rights in Northern Ireland, because it was women MPs who think so much more about what it actually means to other women. It's my view that most people go into politics are very empathetic. They think about what it matters to other people. When they make policies about healthcare, about schools, indeed about immigration, they try to think about their own communities. And only by having more women involved do you have a chance of getting women's lives really considered. So thinking about what we can do, it was very interesting to hear Maria Carfagna talking about how language matters and how social media can have such an impact. And as politicians, we now operate not only in a world that is totally transparent, but in a world that is very judgmental. And very judgmental very, very quickly. And it is polarized in many different ways. So if the group of people, perhaps on Twitter, perhaps on Facebook, form an opinion on you, it escalates very quickly from a view to an outrage to potentially a campaign. And this particularly affects women. We've done a study, Lord Bew in the House of Lords did a study to look at social media abuse to see whether it is correct, what our gut feeling was, that it's impacting more on women than on men. And it's true. There is much more abuse directed towards women politicians than towards men. During the 2016 Democratic primaries, Hillary Clinton received almost twice as much abuse as Bernie Sanders, and the most common word associated with the abuse that she received was bitch. It was the most common used in tweets to Julia Gillard as well in Australia when she was running against Kevin Rudd. So unfortunately, with this accessibility of politicians through social media, the abuse steps up, particularly against women. And when I go around schools, universities and colleges trying to encourage women to think about a career in politics, they often turn to me and say, how can you bear it? Because they've made the mistake of looking at my Twitter feed. And it's true, it can be very nasty. And I think it's so important for politicians to speak up and try and stop it where it takes place, try and call it out, try and make sure that the social media companies take responsibility for making sure that where possible they clean it up, but above all, don't ignore it. Personally, I reassure the women I talk to that I stopped looking at my Twitter feed quite a long time ago. I think the last time I looked at it was in November last year when I was fortunate enough to be brought back into cabinet by the Prime Minister, having had a little sabbatical out for a few months. And I saw the last tweet I decided to finish on a high note, was from somebody who wrote, Amber Rudd, you're the most useless, thoughtless, hopeless member of Parliament. You're only in the cabinet because you look good. And so I framed that one, and I keep it close to remind myself that it's not always bad news coming from Twitter. I would think that we are particularly now, it's particularly important to stand strong, encourage other women, and fight to get to the top. It feels like we are particularly working in a world where there is an increasing cult of the strong man, where the sort of virile masculinity, particularly that someone like Vladimir Putin tries to project, is desperately trying to keep women away from positions of authority. And it is up to us sitting here, and you participating as well and considering it yourself, to stand up strongly against that. To finish on a final note of optimism, if I may, I noticed that the fictional world is way ahead of us. So Borgen was always a great cult film for many of us. I don't know which of you watch Veep, a program I've particularly enjoyed, when of course Veep becomes president is a particularly good moment. But one of my favorites has always been House of Cards. And House of Cards, of course, Claire Underwood turns in the final series and says, my turn now. And she does, of course, get what she wants in the end. She gets a cabinet which has, I'm trying to show it to you here, but I'm not sure I've got it, but those of you who have seen it will know it, a cabinet of all women. So they better make sure they include enough of us, or we're coming to get the whole place. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you, Minister. Now the floor to the Senator Emma Bonino, who has a sort of commitment, European Commission, international trade of European policy, Vice President of the Senate, Minister of Foreign Affairs, but she wants to be remembered for her activity as in defense of women's rights. Thank you. Thank you to the colleagues who have... Each one has someone else who helps, assists her. President Casellati reminded Margaret Thatcher. For me, one of the indefatigable days, I had 2 days in my political training, were the 2 speeches in 1979 at the opening of the European Parliament, elected directly for the first time. The opening session was chaired by Mrs. Weiss, who spoke words which were unforgettable for me. And the day after the election of Simone Veil, there was the speech, her speech again, These were 2 days and 2 speeches that have marked my person so much. So as in my activity of activist, I was really impressed by Simone Veil. Before becoming president of European Parliament, I had a lot of arguments with her, a lot of fights with her in 1974 when she had promoted the law against abortion, illegal abortion in France. I was a young activist in Italy, and so when you feel alone, because at the time, in 75, to speak about abortion was something, let's say, out of place. These were not considered civil rights, keep of being considered as a serious big collateral policy, important politics there with other issues. And in this feeling of solitude, of loneliness, apart from my campaign of party of radicals, when Simone Veil was able to have a law against illegal abortion in France, it was a great support for me, a feeling to say to the war that I was not completely crazy or but that there existed other person, more senior positions who share my view. So it was a great support for me, a moral support for me. This is so because, I'll make it quite short, I'll not return on figures because, of course, I've already been given my colleagues, but I want to make a couple of considerations with you. The first, very often there is this debate if it is better to let women to grow from the lower positions or if it is more useful, the approach up from bottom to top. And these are the 2 questions. I keep on saying that both positions are useful. They are not in contrast one with the other. I think that one could be a synergy from bottom to top, from top to bottom. So that people committed in political life have a duty of representing and compared to my mother, who is a housewife, this must be said, of course. She will have her possibility of responsibility, but who is able to have a higher responsibility? There are a lot of obligations and duties. I would also like to change some stereotypes which are always being given. I do not believe that women are all equal. It's the contrary. Our diversity is an asset, is not a limitation. Each one of us has her own political idea, her own life idea. She gets married or not. She invests her time in career. All of this, I think, must be kept. We are not a trade union. We are not doing the same things. This diversity have to be an element of growth, of stimulus, also at a cultural point of view. And the second aspect is that if one is woman, she has to deal with women. I had a fight with Madeleine Albright, who says that for a powerful woman who does not take care of women, there is a particular place at hell. On this, we had a quarrel. I do believe that if one works as a scientist or as an astronaut or whatever she does, and she does not take care of, in the forefront of female emancipation, is fine for me. We don't have all of us to work in this direction. It has taken so much to go beyond the stereotypes imposed by the family, the church, and we cannot go back to the stereotypes which were attached in the past. This is the politically correct of a good feminist woman. I do not agree. My position is different. We have no decalogue, we have no, all of us are together, and whatever the profession, we are discussing about women in politics, but this is the same, is true for journalists, for school, for university. Our common ground is that we found some barriers, some walls that we have to cross. This is something which, this is a common ground for us all. Whoever is a scientist or a writer or whatever the job we do, there is not a regulation on what a real feminist should do. This is very important because every time we keep on insisting in the very same stereotypes, but we are grouped by this barrier, which is in some cases concrete and of glass in our countries, of exclusion from a top leading position of power and authority. Let's not make the mistake, no, we don't want the power, we don't want the authority because the power is wrong and you can get corrupted. No, this is not the case. The power in itself is not good or bad. It depends on how you exercise it. But not being entitled to a top position does not help. So the possibility of saying, yes, I want to be a powerful woman is something which must be said. Yes, it is a stereotype. A man who is ambitious is simply an ambitious man, and this is something which is considered in a positive way. But if a woman is ambitious, this is immediately in the negative, as if she were the devil dressed Prada. This is in the language we can make a lot of example for our female colleague or male colleague. This is so. The issue of power is of paramount importance. Yes, because without shying away. Our problem is that we had little power in general. I'm sorry, this is my view. The second aspect of Women for Women, power is a drug. It's addictive. Yes, it's addictive. Power is addictive. Who has it, hold it strongly and does not leave it easily. You want a chair there. There's a person over there, traditionally speaking. If you want that position, or you lead him to the door, otherwise, or less kindly, you accompany him. But the problem of a glass ceiling is an issue of power, and who has the power, hold it tightly. So if that is what we want, because it can be useful, because it is possible to exercise and to carry on some project with power, so we have to not to be co-opted, because the other idea is if I stand on one side and I'm a secretary, one day or the other, someone will recognize my activity. Forget it. This is not so. No one will give you the power. Or maybe anyone upon conviction that you will keep on being a nice secretary. we are doing women in politics, and thank you all, but this is not different from journalism. How many wonderful journalists do you have? How many editors do you have? How many wonderful professors do you have in Italy, women professor? How many head of university? I was being told free, and he listed the names. You remember the names and surname because they are free, and this is obvious. So we have to keep in mind these dynamics, how it works. Otherwise, I don't want to be negative, quite the contrary. Notwithstanding all the situation, all the scenario, and in some cases without mentioning then the sharing of family responsibility as less than equal. But apart from these considerations, many steps ahead have been made, which means that it is possible to change, and we have, if it is possible, we have to do it. Is it easy? No. It has to be given for granted? No. The first stereotype, is women's solidarity. Forget it. Forget it. It is not so, because if women are person, as all of us are, we are competitive as men are. So female solidarity, let's stop it. Let's stop it and put it in the cupboard like an old assets, an old dress. So you are competing for the same position with another woman, and of course you will be in the identical situation. In the end, you'll be eliminated both, and a man takes your position. Typically, this is what happens. One more thing that women are not average. Or they risk, or they take a risk, or they don't. Even if they're bad, they are not average. So we have this possibility of being quite determined. And this is true when women, when they are bad, they are really bad. So we have made a lot step forward. Some countries ahead of us may assist. So Europe, in my opinion, is a very important dimension as an exchange of experience. In my opinion, from 79 onward, it has been fundamental. It is difficult. In Europe, I was the only woman in a room where all men were present. I was always alone in a room in Italy and in other countries. I'm not making the list. But in Northern Europe, it is quite difficult to be in a room alone with all male colleagues. And finally, as I was saying before getting in, nobody will ever give you anything, but it's also true that a lot of things are possible, are still possible, especially do not go backward, because it will be difficult to go forward. Pay attention not to go and start too late. When a series of acquired rights, if they are not defended, you wake up one morning and you see that these rights are no longer there. And this is no good. I've tried to repeat it. It's years that I keep on repeating. The newest episodes, I hope, were more effective than my words in ringing this alarm bell, because, of course, I see that there are a lot more things to do, and to be happier than that. Before arriving here, reaching the room, and thank you for inviting me. That once I met at an event a friend of mine, a lady I know, She made a wonderful speech, and she said, for a woman to be complied and respected in her workplace must be 3 times more skilled, 3 times more prepared, 3 times more qualified than her male colleague. Everyone smiled. It is not so difficult. So it's easy. Don't get worried, because it's possible. It's quite easy. But you have to work hard. You have to keep on working. You should avoid and follow also bad speech, hate speech, and also a vulgar way of speaking, as our vice president told us. And the difference here lies from the fact that apart from the highest representative of a government, this is a trend which is so pervasive that goes up to the kindergarten. So if there is something we should do, we should try and resist this vulgarity. My mother told me, she was nearly unskilled, she didn't, that good education is revolutionary. And remember, institutional good education is revolutionary. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you very much, Senator Emma Bonino. And now the floor to Eleanor Lang, Deputy Speaker of the House of Commons, the equivalent of the Vice President of the House of Commons. She joined Parliament in 1987 for the first time. She covered the shadow post for women, and she also covered the shadow post for justice. And since 2016, she's been the Deputy Speaker for the House of Commons.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and thank you very much for inviting us to take part in this really interesting event today. Can I start by making a slight correction? I'm not that old. I wasn't elected in 1987. I was elected in 1997. Right. Although, well, we'll leave it at that. It's been a great pleasure to visit your wonderful Parliament buildings today. I had the honor of going to the Senate this morning and coming here this afternoon. We think we have a great old building in the Palace of Westminster and Big Ben in the centre of London, but I concede that yours is far more beautiful and elegant. It has been most interesting to bring together a consideration of the similar challenges and solutions that we have as similar legislatures in facing how we go forward on matters of gender equality, indeed all equality. And Emma, may I say, it is a real honor to sit beside you this afternoon, as you are a legendary champion of equal rights. Thank you. Thank you. I recently met the author of a book called The Hidden Sex, a lady called Caroline Crianza Perez. And her thesis is that the world has been made by men and for men. Now, men can't be blamed for this because they are not women. So they see things through the eyes of men. Of course they do. One of the small examples, I won't give too many from this book, is that more women die in car accidents because seatbelts are made to fit men, and they save a man's body, but they don't sit on a woman's body in the same way as they do on a man's body, and so more women die because they're not saved by seatbelts. Isn't that astonishingly awful? And there's not much that we can do right now about seatbelts, although I'm hoping that all the major car companies, and you might like to tell the good Italian car companies about this, I can send you copies of the book if you would like them. Not much we can do about that right now, but my thesis is that just as the practical world was built by men, for men, so was the world of politics. And we so often find that the phrases that are used, the language that's used, the systems of reporting that are used are based on the military. And that it's a top-down idea that there's someone who is the boss, and he issues an order, and his order is obeyed, and you don't answer back. Well, that's not how women do things, is it? When I was 21 and a student, I was elected as the first woman to be president of Edinburgh University Union. And when I look back and think why I did this, why I fought a really feisty and rather difficult election and won it, I think I did it because everybody told me I couldn't. I think I was determined to win that election and to show that a woman could do that job just for the sake of proving that a woman could do that job. But decades later, with a lot more political experience behind me, I finally had the courage to realize, about 15 years ago, that the real reason for having to persevere as a woman in the political world is not just to prove a point, but because women do things differently from men. It took me from when I was 21 until I was about 42 to have the courage to say that. And I didn't dare say it because I thought I'd be laughed at. And indeed, when I encouraged I was at that point shadow minister for women and equality. And I encouraged the Conservative Women's Organization to adopt this as their motto. Women do things differently from men. And at first, lots of people laughed at it. And then they realized that actually this was a fair point, a point that had to be made and a point that ought to be made. And once you accept that women do things differently from men, we can stop having to try to do things in the male way, as if we're all in the army and standing up straight and to attention, because it's not how we do it. When I multitask, my ex-husband used to say to me, "Why can't you just concentrate on what I'm saying? Why are you doing something else at the same time? You really are absolutely useless." You can see why he's my ex-husband. But I eventually had to try to persuade him, though he's totally unpersuaded, that I have the mental capacity to take in what he's telling me while also loading the dishwasher, you know. It's not actually that difficult, as Emma just explained to us. It's not, is it? But to take forward this thesis that women do things differently, it matters because we do things differently in two ways. First of all, there's policy, and then there is the method by which we do things. Let's look at policy first. It's very sad that Theresa May, to whom I pay tribute along with everyone else this afternoon as the UK's second woman Prime Minister, and an extremely good one she has been too, that Theresa May is more likely to be remembered for Brexit and all that that entails than for the real change that she has brought to the UK through her work on modern slavery and prostitution and domestic violence. Many of these matters Amber took on after Theresa became Prime Minister and Amber became Home Secretary. And having a woman as Home Secretary and Prime Minister and then another woman as Home Secretary is what has made a real difference on those areas. I discovered this last week when I was in the Isle of Man, which is a very small legislature. The Isle of Man is an island off the west coast of the north of England. They have a population of only 85,000, and they worked out that they had hardly any diversity in their political institutions. They had a legislative council, which is the equivalent of the Senate, which has 8 members. Those 8 members had always been men, senior men, I mean old men. They had a survey done, they had an in-depth survey done about what they should do about their diversity. They immediately took steps to introduce women, young or middle-aged women, to this legislative assembly. The reason why this is a good example is that because it's such a small legislature and a small population, change happens quickly. In a large country like yours or ours, it takes longer. They were able, within 1 year, to bring in 5 women out of the 8 in their legislative council, and they've completely changed the way they do things, and more importantly, they have changed the laws that they are making, because those 5 youngish women have a different aspect on things than the old men who had been there for generations. They take the women's aspect into greater account, give a heavier weight in weighing up the pros and cons of a policy to the women's aspect or the family aspect or the caring aspect, rather than just the usual aspect which is considered. We find in the UK the practical effect of having a large number of female MPs is that issues which were previously whispered in private have now entered mainstream political debate in a way which would have been unthinkable when I was first elected 22 years ago. We had a good example of this last week, as Amber mentioned, in respect of a bill on Northern Ireland, in the course of which the UK House of Commons legislated to allow abortion to be introduced under very strict and careful rules, of course, in Northern Ireland. And Emma, I know this is one of your political subjects and one on which you fought before it became mainstream and recognized as important. You fought at a time when it was a very difficult fight. We thought we'd won that fight, but we hadn't in a part of the United Kingdom. And I found myself in a position last week of having to rule as Deputy Speaker as to whether the amendment which had been tabled, which would allow the abortion issue to be taken to the next stage, as to whether it was allowable legally and constitutionally. And arguments were put to me on both sides. It was really difficult to make that decision because, as a lawyer, I could see both sides of the argument, and I could have ruled either way, to be perfectly honest. But it takes political will to make a change which many people are against. And the fact that we have, in the UK House of Commons now, a critical mass, a large number of female MPs, made the huge difference on this issue. I decided that it would be wrong to stop debate and to prohibit a vote on a matter which clearly had the support of a large number of people. And so I decided that it should be debated and put to the vote. I didn't know how the vote would turn out. I half expected that it would not be carried, that it would be defeated. It was carried by a majority of well over 200, a huge vindication that it was right to debate it, and it was right to allow those women who were standing up for women's rights to have their voices heard in our legislature. That wouldn't have happened in the past. So we come on to considering women do things differently in policy, and women do things differently in the methods by which we do them. I would argue that in order to achieve a meaningful cultural shift in any legislature, we need to have a critical mass of women MPs. When I was first elected, it was well under 20%. There weren't many of us. We had to shout loudly to be heard. It's now well over 30%, and therefore it's much easier to be heard. And we consider why it's so difficult for women to make the breakthrough to become part of the legislature. One of the challenges which I consider is important is what I call the mirror effect, which is that as people identify and appoint successors to their own job, they have a tendency to appoint people in whom they see themselves reflected. Therefore, a man aged 60 looks for a man aged 40 to replace him. That's who he trusts to do the job that he has done. Therefore, it's more and more important that we get a critical mass, a significant number of women in senior positions, so that when they make the appointments and they encourage people to follow in their footsteps or to take on their role when they move on, it's more likely to be a woman. You can imagine it as a pyramid effect. The more you have at the top, the more you will have underneath that, and therefore the pyramid grows, and therefore the number of women grows. And why does it matter? It matters because rather than gender equality being seen as a marginal issue, it is seen as part of every issue. So we find that even in debates on matters which are not considered to be women's matters, and why on earth should we think that women should only ever speak or be involved in women's matters, we find that the women's angle on the question, be it defense or agriculture or finance, the women's angle, the women's different aspect is taken into account rather than marginalized. And the other thing about having a critical mass of women in any organization, and certainly in any legislature, is that it gives confidence to other women. I've got more confidence today because I'm sitting beside Emma. So we give each other confidence. And also, I may say, the more that men see women achieving the less they can criticize and the more they, as men, will have confidence that women can do certain jobs. And we wouldn't have got where we are in making progress in the UK without the significant support of a great many men who believe in the cause of equality. And David Cameron was an excellent Prime Minister as far as that was concerned. He just wouldn't listen to anyone who said that it didn't matter. So having a critical mass gives women confidence. I said this to conference of young women lawyers that I was addressing a couple of weeks ago. Afterwards, I took questions, and the first question from a really smart girl from the floor was, "You said that having confidence is really important, but what do you do if you don't have confidence?" And I said, "Well, you must simply pretend. You have to pretend that you have confidence, and you have to play the part of the confident woman, and then eventually, well, I'm still hoping that eventually that confidence will come, but that is how you do it." I must be careful, Madam President, because I could say so much more about what we do in the UK, but I don't want to take up too much of your time. We have learned today that that you have imposed quotas on the way in which women and men are elected to your legislatures, and it was very interesting to see the system that was used in the EU elections just a few weeks ago, and you have benefited enormously from quotas. We have decided not to have quotas, but to use soft power, to use different ways of encouraging women to come into Parliament. We have something called the 50-50 Parliament organisation, and different political parties use different methods of putting women onto their list of candidates, not just to be on the list of candidates, but to be in seats where they will actually win, where they will actually be elected. Because it's very easy for a political party to say, "Oh, we had 50% women candidates," but actually, if only 20% actually win, that's not good enough. We have to have them in the places where they're going to win. And the way that we have done that in the Conservative Party is through an organisation called Women to Win. And Women to Win works in a very simple way of trying to help. This is similar to another organisation called Ask Her to Stand. These organisations identify women who might possibly wish to come forward, and then encourage them and give them help and teach them how to, well, actually, what we teach them is how to pretend to be confident. And in most cases, it works. That was how the 5 women were found in the Isle of Man. Every one of those 5 women in the Isle of Man told me that when first asked if they would become part of the legislature, they had said, "Oh, no, I couldn't possibly do that. I'm just a mother," or "I'm just a teacher." But they were persuaded to do it, and strangely, once they were there, they discovered, as Emma has so cleverly described to you, that proving that you are as good as a man, if not better, is not as difficult as they thought that it would be. We have also looked in the House of Commons at the ways in which we were stopping people from becoming members of Parliament, because we sit for long hours. We make it difficult if you have a family, if you have caring responsibilities, if you have an aged parent, if you live far away. We've made changes to Parliament's hours and procedures and working practices. And you know, it shouldn't be necessary in 2019 to say how important it is that we should treat everyone with respect and consideration, and to recognize the impact that the maladministration of power and influence has on the more junior people in an organization. There is much that we're doing at present in the House of Commons to introduce what we call the respect strategy. There's one obvious one. As Emma said, diversity is an asset. It should be obvious that in addition to whatever else young women are doing in the workplace, women also have to produce babies. And if we wish our legislature to reflect the population that we purport to represent, then we have to have young women in Parliament, and we have to make it possible for women to have babies as well as to be a parliamentarian. I don't know how difficult it is here in Italy, but when I had a baby 18 years, 1 month and 2 days ago. Funny, I know that exactly. That's because since my son became 18, I am newly liberated. I was told, but surely you won't fight the next election. You're having a baby, you have to give up your seat. Well, of course I didn't, because we must never give up. We must never give in. We have just introduced in the UK Parliament, and if you haven't already done this, it is something that is making a huge difference, proxy voting, so that a woman who is on maternity leave, and indeed a man for 2 weeks of paternity leave, can have a vote cast for them by somebody else. So that it makes it much more realistic for a young woman also to be a representative. So far from ever giving in, I revert to what the American civil rights activist Constance Baker Motley once said, which is that something which we think is impossible now is not impossible in another decade. Having served 2 decades in the House of Commons, I really hope to see the impossible achieved in the next decade, and that people will recognize that every group in society does things different from every other group in society, and far from being afraid to be laughed at for saying how we should change things, we as women in Parliament are now not afraid to say that we should be kinder and gentler and do things differently. I'll take the risk of being laughed at for saying that, because it's the right thing to do. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Now the floor to the Mayor Valeria Mancinelli, Super Mayor. She is the mayor since June 2013. She was awarded the best mayor in the world. Thank you. I'm really happy and honored to take part to this initiative. And I must say that I've listened carefully, and I was pleased to hear all my colleagues, if I may say so. I will be frank and say all the suggestions and all things I shared personally, because I've lived in my my daily life are those said by the words by Emma Bonino, also what concerns non-politically correct, because I share her every single word she says. Let me add just a few words, because I may simply say I'm a lawyer by profession. I may say, let's think of what said the briefs. No, but I refer to your words, I confirm what you say, but I may add some personal experience to your words, to the words of Mrs. Senator Bonino. All the achievements of these decades for Italy of legal equal opportunities, which are not of minor importance. Let me remind you also, because for me it has been very important, my grandmother, who voted soon after the war, and she was so proud of being a voter because this possibility had been neglected, because also in Italy the suffrage for men arrived late, but for women it became later. So every single election, my grandmother woke up at 7 and at 6 and at 7 she was at casting the ballot, because I don't want to know what happens to me. I have voted, and this is something we have inherited more with behaviors and or with speeches. Just as an example, I am a lawyer by profession, and when I started my profession and I discovered that until 1963 women were not entitled to be a judge. They were not supposed to be to run office as a judge. I am not underestimating all the achievements in Italy, and I agree with what Emma and all of you have said. We have to take care, because these goals we have reached are not to be taken for granted. Not only as laws, nor on material constitution, that is the opinion, the mentality, widespread mentality that sometimes precedes or follows the legal changes in the negative. So let's supervise this democratic achievement. But we have to go on, to go ahead, and I think, sorry if as to the legality, there is not much to do. I think that the majority of electoral laws or law provisions of popular willingness, the double preference of gender, these are useful, but certainly these are aspects and conquests which we have made. There's not much more to be done, but we have to defend what we have gained so far. What we still have to do, especially in terms of ideas of a cultural shift, because nowadays there are, in some measure, some forms of incivility compared to believing equality between men and women. And this is another aspect which must not be set aside. But I really believe that what's important is our change in our mind. There must be a change. I'm a mayor of a political area of a left-wing party. I come from that situation, and in this field, the idea that power was something, at least in words, but power was not was negative. Yes, it can be a drug, it can be addictive, and it eats up the person that's new. But for a long time, also in the female culture, in the left-wing females, the idea that power was male and was something to let aside. It was really silly. But in order to keep good education, it was a silly thought, a silly idea, because the power per se is an instrument to impact on reality. So it depends on the way you use your power. But in itself, a power is most noble things to achieve, because of the possibility of impacting and changing reality. And as such, if we want to state our ideas, our ideals in which we believe for the community, they must be turned into reality. You have to change reality. Otherwise, it is just a debate which has no influence over reality. So the power is something, the authority is something important and positive. And women should play a key role for themselves, but also for society, because to widen the amount of people governing, this is a competitive factor for the whole community. And apart from being a right for a part of this community. But if we want to achieve a result, each of us has to behave as a person who is aware of the fact that she has to fight in order to gain power. And it is important to do so in a correct direction. But here there is a sort of cultural barrier that we must surpass. As Emma was saying, the power is like freedom. Nobody gives it to you freely. So, of course, if you keep on considering it as hell, as evil, it will be difficult for male colleague are so ready or available. I'm not making a distinction in this sense. My case is that I've become a mayor in 2013, and last year I was reconfirming my office, and have become mayor, and I was candidate because I was one of the primary at left-wing party, because the group didn't want to have me among the of a council, and they didn't want to have me among them. This is something which occurs not only in the left-wing parties, but also in other areas. And in that situation, there was a leading group that kept on dealing with his own ideas. And in this situation, in order to change the situation, I wanted to give my contribution. I had my own ideas, and so I thought I could be useful. And this is why I started to stand for election. So they were forced to do it. I won, even though they had decided to put a very good person against me. I won elections, and we were reconfirmed the second time. The second time, before standing for election, yes, you don't have to run again for primary elections. I think that primary election must be are important, because it must be an open way of selecting someone else. The primary are important in my view, because you have to stand for election once the game is open, and there was no one who wanted to challenge me. Yes, no, I did not. No one was worried. No one was threatened. But this enables me to work as a mayor by choosing the councillor, female and male, in a trust relationship of names. And this, of course, if I had been chosen of this role of candidate by the parties or movement or whatever it is, I stood for elections, and these were the critics I've received. I'm too ambitious. I'm a lone woman in charge of power. But when the results have come, because I have exercised my responsibility, the responsibility which had been conferred upon me. Women are interested in a policy in which the selection of leaders happens through the only authoritative court, that are electors. If a selection is made with other mechanisms, the results are not satisfactory from my point of view, because there must be a selection, because there is a trend to keep on exercise people who is already in power, someone who has no personality. There is a selection which normally is not, the only selection which is possible is the one which is made by electors, which are an open competition, just to say so. And this is important because electoral laws, for instance, but not only, internal rules of single parties, because this is the only way we can select the best or the less worse of our leaders. And on this ground, it is possible to have meritocracy, because women, in this case, real women, have a possibility of having power. So people who want to exercise, to play a role, to have authority, not simply being a name which has been to be appointed by a party. So it's important to reform policy, which is something which must be done. There must be a push, a battle, a political battle within the single movements and in general in the civil society in this direction for a reform of electoral law, because in our own country is a horrible law we have, and if electoral mechanism of direct election of a mayor, and one of very few laws which has worked, but also in our legal system, if a mayor resigns, all the others go home, so the city councillor goes away. So we move in that direction. We don't have to copy, but if we don't go in this direction, when electors have their say, I think that we will not have good leaders, and we will have less opportunity like women.
Grazie.
I would like to thank all the speakers, very high-profile and passionate contributions by summarizing, doing a recap. There is a need to reinforce political representation of women, as highlighted by Ms. Carfagna, especially in a period like this, in a period of crisis like this, where women and children are particularly vulnerable. As Ms. Carfagna was saying, women have different methods based on respect, protection, and as Mr. Why do we need women? Because women have a different method and they have a different political agenda in their minds, with a particular focus on female issues and gender discrimination. So more women in politics, more politics for women. And this is a very important viewpoint. Women do things in a different way, as highlighted by the Deputy Speaker, by putting the gender-based difference and disparity at the heart of the political agenda, as Ms. Bonino was saying, without talking about stereotypes like solidarity. We should be aware that we do have common ground, that is to break the glass ceiling, that is common ground to all of us. And in many contributions, attention was devoted to verbal violence that affect women, particularly in this moment, and as suggested by Jill Morris, one of the topics that will be dealt with in the next meetings of women in social media. We will talk about journals, with a few women in holding senior positions, and also this issue of verbal violence on social media will be dealt with. And then an appeal that was launched both by Ms. Carfagna and by Senator Bonino and Mayor Mancinelli and by Ms. Lane. We shouldn't take anything for granted. We have won a lot. It is very easy to go back. Ms. Carfagna suggested we should be monitoring any area. We shouldn't give in, Mrs. Lang said, because what the progress we gained, we run the risk of losing the progress we have made, so we shouldn't go back. And I would like to remind you of a sentence by Malala Yousafzai. In the world there are two powers, the power of the sword and the power of the pen, but there is a third one, stronger, the power of women.
Ringraziamo.
I would like to thank you all for being here today with us. Thank you.